Chaos and violence in the streets. Amorphous lumps of sadistic living flesh trying to ever expand their monstrous biomasses, all under the tyranny of an infected sky. It is one of the worst-case scenarios that the Foundation could have ever predicted. SCP-001 has become the designation of the yellow dwarf star known to scientists as Sol, and to the majority of humanity as our sun. This once beneficial creation of nature has become a hostile force that threatens to bring about an apocalypse of all life on the planet. Since ancient times, the people of planet Earth have looked up at the sun not merely for warmth, but for the great answers to life itself. The light that this celestial body provided had been a key ingredient in the development of life as we know it. But when day broke, everything changed. Across the world, every human being that comes into contact with the ultraviolet rays of SCP-001 is irreversibly transformed into a slithering mass of molten protoplasmic flesh. The same happens to every other biological creature with animal cells, from the smallest insect to the mighty elephants of the Serengeti. The smaller variations of these melted blobs soon join with the larger ones, coalescing into singular colonial life forms. Though flora and fungi are immune to this abominable transmutation, the blazing intensity of the now malicious sunlight has caused much of them to wilt into brittle brown patches of decay. The places that were once the great forests of the world are now little more than dried-out cemeteries, where crumbling petrified trees stand in for tombstones. The rivers, lakes, and oceans haven't fared much better. The heat of the sun has caused the sea levels to decline as water rapidly evaporates, leaving behind abyssal valleys of salted wet soup, swimming with the wriggling waxen clumps that were formerly fish and whales. The lands that were once civilized are the most horrible of all biomes. Entire cities crawl with the shapeless nightmare spawn of SCP-001, which possesses both a fearsome strength and an insatiable hunger to track down all unaffected humans and incorporate them into the same globulous collective. Millions of cars sit empty on the highways and streets in eternal traffic jams that may never become unstuck ever again. Survivors can only live in the shadows or under the artificial light of building interiors. And even then, the defenses of such sanctuaries must be reinforced with durable and seamless barriers to prevent the entry of the flesh monsters. It is from within the precarious safety of its own hidden bunkers that the Foundation has planned a daring countermeasure to the ongoing existence of SCP-001. While there is no feasible benefit to destroying the sun, and such a thing would most likely just result in more tragedy, there could theoretically be a way for many members of the surviving human race to find a future outside of the risk of exposure. On Earth's moon, there exists a facet of the rocky spheroid that was outward-facing regardless of where the moon was in its orbit around the planet. This dark side was one of the few places where direct sunlight could become a non-issue, and where the human population could start a new life under these world-shattering circumstances. The plan was simple yet elegant, and would utilize the existing aerospace technology of nations across the globe with the bolstered assistance of Foundation resources. The maiden voyage would transport a crew of highly skilled contract workers and top-level researchers to the moon, and that group would establish the beginnings of a sustainable outpost. Then, once the minimum of hospitable conditions were met, a second shuttle would be launched from Earth with an influx of civilians, who would be given shelter and roles to play in the new moon base. The O5 Council was eager to greenlight the research team's ambitious concept, especially since every one of them was promised a seat on the first of the ships to launch. With the approval of their superiors, the heads of the various containment facilities pooled their spending power in order to acquire the rockets needed for Phase 1. While most governments on Earth had been dissolved, literally in many cases, the Foundation reached out to whatever political infrastructures were still in place. The event that kicked off SCP-001 when day breaks had shattered normalcy to such an extent that the idea of keeping anomalies classified had become obsolete. To gain the trust of all surviving groups of interest, the SCP Foundation traded whatever secrets it needed to, even promising the future custody of several safe and Euclid-class SCPs to various interested parties. This was a collaborative venture on a scale that would have been unheard of in the world before SCP-001, but the ever-present fear of being melted into horrible aberrations seemed to bring out the long-lost spirit of brotherhood in all involved. There were still those few factions who defied the organization, most notably the Chaos Insurgency, who wished to bring to fruition a scattered global empire under the absolute control of their leadership. The reckless actions of this group of interest threatened the very premise of the Moonbase plan, and the Foundation was forced to pursue a covert war in order to ensure that the right chain of events could proceed. In this post-apocalyptic battle of espionage, the SCP Foundation was able to secure powerful yet unlikely allies in the Serpent's Hand, and among various branches of Sarkic cults. Kinship with the former was relatively painless, as the main demands of the Serpent's Hand was granting autonomy and creature comforts to several humanoid SCPs, many of which were able to use their anomalous abilities to great effect against the operatives of the Chaos Insurgency. Though the Sarkics did most of the fighting and assassination work required to bring down the Chaos Insurgency, the Foundation was far less sure of their ultimate motives for being so cooperative. According to the cultists themselves, the solar phenomenon of SCP-001 was seen as the ideal culling mechanism for all the weakest beings on Earth. Though it was never part of the Sarkic faith prior to the Daybreak, the terrible scenario had been given post hoc religious significance. Whatever the true reason for their compliance, the Sarkics took pride in butchering the fractured leadership of the Chaos Insurgency, and were more than willing to assist in the Foundation's Moonbase endeavor if it meant that the strong could live on while the weak perished. Because of the penchant for zealous violence that was inherent to the Sarkics, the Foundation was sure to be conservative with the information that was shared with the cultists, most especially the exact number and broad identities of the second shuttle's passengers. As the situation on Earth grew even more grim, the size and amount of the flesh oozes created as a result of SCP-001 continued to increase. New York had become the habitat of a particularly aggressive mountain of rolling wax, composed of the thrashing bodies of thousands of former humans and just as many rats and pigeons. Even though all biological creatures within the mass had melted to the point of being unrecognizable, the diverse range of animals that were once contained in the Central Park Zoo, the Bronx Zoo, and several other zoos from throughout the area, in and around the island of Manhattan. It was a grim reflection of the fate of most life on the planet, but the SCP Foundation could not concern itself with the whole of planetary ecology. Because the planet itself would soon be abandoned, there were entire regions of the globe that would have to be written off for the sake of the mission. The Sarkics, for their part, were overjoyed that more death and culling was tactically being authorized by the Foundation, but there was no joy among the researchers, even as the day of the first launch came to pass. From a secret underground silo located beneath the surface of one of the Foundation's most fortified containment sites, the Moon Maiden was successfully dispatched into space. It was a completely sealed spacecraft, equipped with an elaborate system of cameras that could observe the outside of the hull without exposing the crucial personnel inside to the effects of the hostile sunlight. As per the Foundation's preference, there were no members of any of the Sarkic cults aboard this initial ship. The Uneasy Alliance had been instrumental in the early preparation stages of the plan, but a rift of philosophical difference between the two groups was starting to become an obstacle to the continuation of the mission. The trouble was that with most of the essential research team inbound to the moon, much of the fighting force that remained on Earth had been infiltrated by Sarki operatives. A bloody internal conflict between the Sarkic faction of the group alliance with the Foundation faction was all but inevitable, and there was already a second level of classified intel relating to the discreet disposal of the Sarkic true believers before the civilian launch. The beginnings of civil unrest formed on the Earth while the Moon Maiden reached its lunar destination without any notable incident. Once the safe area was confirmed by a trial and error process of sending out lab rat probes, and the unfortunate rodents that wound up affected by SCP-001's effects were disposed of via the specially designed self-immolating spacesuits that the Foundation had made standard issue for all said biological probes, the contractors got to work, assembling the pre-planned and packaged structures that would form the main area of the Moonbase. Bioengineered algae and insect farms were transferred from the ship to the moon's surface, allowing for the sustainable growth of energy-given foodstuffs. In addition, a water treatment plant was made the first permanent structure in order to secure the necessary plumbing and hydration needs of the Moon Maiden's pioneers. To the amazement of the entire first group, the moon base was achieving its hospitable goals well within the time frame that the Foundation had painstakingly planned for back on Earth. After suffering for so long under the hellish conditions of a planet racked by the influence of SCP-001, it was almost a miracle that things were going so well on the dark side of the moon. The first couple of weeks passed, and the research team felt confident in sending a report back to the remaining Foundation members on Earth. This diplomatic move did draw some ire from the O5 Council, who wanted to postpone the arrival of the chattering masses for as long as was humanly possible. But the routine callousness of these mysterious elites was not without its limits, and the gap between altruism and prudence soon closed as it became apparent that the time had come to truly save the people of Earth from SCP-001. When word ultimately got back around to the Foundation's terrestrial operatives, there had already been several cloak and dagger skirmishes within the Sarkics. The heavy number of deaths from these conflicts weighed on the Foundation personnel in charge of the second launch, while the Serpent's Hand and the humanoid SCPs who had been assisting them had sustained enough casualties that their influence was almost non-existent. The process of staving off the bloodthirsty cultists while also gathering the civilian population for the mass transport shuttle was a feat of profound difficulty, and could not be accomplished without some severe lapses in thoroughness. Many surviving members of other once inimical groups of interest managed to stow away in disguise among the ordinary citizens. There were even some Keter-class SCPs who found it in themselves to suppress their destructive urges in order to board the vessel under the Foundation's nose. But perhaps most insidiously of all were the Sarkic saboteurs, who had secreted themselves into the hidden place of the shuttle for what would be the pinnacle of radical violence for their faith. When the spacecraft launched, the Sarkics dismantled the key panel on the interior, creating a window through which unfiltered sunlight was able to enter one of the shuttle's many enormous population chambers. Instantly, a huge swath of humans aboard the ship were transformed into SCP-001-affected oozes that started to prey on the other passengers. Mission Control was stricken with horror and grief as the carefully orchestrated cull of the Sarkic saboteurs began to throw the entire moon base plan into jeopardy. It was too late to bring the shuttle back down to Earth, and to destroy with surface-to-space weaponry would be to commit an act of human genocide. And yet, if the shuttle arrived on the dark side of the moon with a squirming crowd of mostly inhuman abominations, it would be the doom of the entire human race. The Foundation considered their options, but unfortunately for them, there was no time to make a decision. Mission Control was soon brought under siege by a combined force of Sarkic converts formerly loyal to various mobile task forces. In the time before SCP-001, all of these operatives would have been insulted at the idea that they would ever join forces with cannibalistic religious nutcases like the Sarkics. These times were different, to say the least. There was something about abject hardship that funneled the most stressed out and traumatized members of society towards spiritual practice. The bloodier, the better. Having amassed an undisputed monopoly on violence and the overwhelming desire to visit it on the vulnerable, the Sarkics effectively became the only legitimate ruling power on Earth. That is, in a world where legitimacy was decided purely by naked brutality. A religious text from one of the planet's other most prominent faiths, the Book of Matthew, stated that the meek would inherit the Earth. But an Earth under the thrall of the united Sarkic cult would have no place whatsoever for the meek. Their foretold inheritance would be forever denied. Back on the mass population shuttle, utter bedlam had broken out as the fleshy wax continued to assimilate more of the human passengers. Those who managed to get behind the reinforced blast doors would have more time than the unfortunates who were exposed first, but those defenses would not hold for the duration of the voyage. Humanity itself was contained mostly within the shuttle, and if this tragedy reached its natural extreme, then the human race was practically an artifact of a universe that had moved on. But even while hurtling through space and stalked by a mindless wave of waxy freaks, Earth's only refugees were not without protectors. The bizarre fact of it was that back on Earth, these would-be saviors were once feared as existential threats to the entirety of life on the planet. Their identities were more than known to the SCP Foundation, as it was the Foundation that gave these individual anomalies their infamous designations. Mingling within the crowd of scared humans, there was SCP-076, a warrior capable of generating metal weapons from localized portals around his body. He was more than a match for most anomalous and non-anomalous beings in existence, and had survived the daybreak by encasing himself in an impenetrable suit of black armor forged from his very own weapons.
Ugh, I really hate humans.
SCP-076, aka Abel, thought to himself as the ordinary people around him continued to scream and panic. Nevertheless, he knew that his own immortal life depended on the population reaching the base on the dark side of the moon. Without a human population to blend into, the Foundation would spare no expense in containing Abel once more. He didn't like it, but the one option he had was to defend these screaming folks from the incoming amalgamations that were headed towards them. Out of sight, Abel donned his black armor and strode forth into the area of the ship where the wax creatures were wreaking absolute havoc. His appearance prompted reactions of relief from some of the fleeing humans, who recognized him from the days he spent wandering after the dawn of SCP-001. In those days, he had been known as the Black Warrior, and was, however unlikely it seemed, celebrated as a folk hero to the survivors of the daybreak. Abel took the stage and drew forth his mighty black blade, slicing through the nearest mass of transmuted flesh wax. His attack provoked the blobby creatures, but he didn't back down as they converged on him.
Like I said, I hate humans, so how dare you make me care about them?
He dove into the fray, summoning a second sword into his hand and cutting through every hostile amalgamation with masterful precision and agility. Though Abel's armor protected him from any errant rays of sunlight that might have shone through into the shuttle, he still had to be wary of the size of the abominable collective he was fighting. One wrong move and he could wind up smothered under the affected mass and fused into it. 076 was determined for that not to happen, and stayed mobile as he carved through his adversaries. But these things were resilient, and while slashing them to pieces did make them smaller, it was becoming clear that each split ooze had a will of its own. If Abel dodged an attack from his many enemies, the flesh would rejoin into one powerful unit, and if he didn't, he could not afford to see what might happen. And so, his careful and measured battle of attrition continued as the humans cowered and begged any god that wasn't worshipped by the Sarkics for salvation. No god answered. Not yet, anyway. But that didn't mean that Abel was alone in the fight. An indestructible force had been waiting in the wings for an opportunity to rip right through all the disgusting life forms aboard the ship. To survive the vacuum of space and void, SCP-682 had shrunk down to the size of a tardigrade and made itself a stowaway on the Foundation shuttle. During its period in hiding among the tardigrades, 682 had effectively become the king of their kind, and ruled with complete tyranny. Though it was fun while it lasted, the hard-to-destroy reptile had grown bored of its illustrious reign and decided that it wanted to return to full size. And so SCP-682 joined the battle, alongside SCP-076.
You're a pitiful sight, Abel,
laughed SCP-682.
I thought I'd be the one killing these humans, but if you can't protect them, they're as good as prey for these disgusting flesh sacks. Shut up, you damn dragon,
Abel spat.
I could still gut you and destroy these weaklings. Oh, I'll get them out of the way. Then we'll see who guts who,
SCP-682 replied, with the overwhelming competitive tension of a pair of hot-blooded rivals straight from the pages of Shonen Jump. Abel and SCP-682 went absolutely Dragon Ball Z on the slimy creeps. Back to back, they watched each other's blind spots and kept each other safe from the threat of the amalgamated former humans. Two Keter-class SCPs working in perfect unison was enough of a sight to see, but the fact that both of them were working together as humanity's defenders was nothing that anyone at the Foundation could have predicted. But the God's honest truth was that SCP-682 had always been an unpredictable creature, and its adaptations to this current situation were a showcase of the reptile's versatility. Since there was still a chance of sunlight entering the interior of the shuttle, SCP-682 had created an unusual shield against the effects of SCP-001, a constant secretion of liquid shadow that had turned the hard-to-destroy reptile into a vanablack version of itself that would repel all light. You've heard of SPF 50 sunscreen, but the Keter class was now wearing SPF 682 sunscreen. Bad joke? Yeah, bad joke.
Slip, slap, slop. You disgusting creatures.
SCP-682 taunted the amalgamations. Together, the hard-to-destroy reptile and Abel held fast against the expanding mass of liquid wax. The warrior and the dragon were now the bulwark keeping the human race alive. The efforts of the two anti-heroic icons was not in vain either, as all at once the prayers of the civilian passengers were answered. SCP-343, God himself, descended from thin air in a nimbus of holy light. A heavenly chorus of angelic voices heralded his splendid arrival, and he wasted no time joining the fray to assist 076.
My dear child, fear not, for I will see to it that your life, taken so cruelly when this all began, will not be made a sacrifice again.
Ugh, always with the theatrics, huh, 343?
Abel groaned at God.
What do you expect from a god?
SCP-682 added,
If the listener's talking, be sure to remind it that I cannot perceive it. All right, Abel?
God laughed. God raised a hand, and soon the window where the sunlight had entered into the shuttle was closed once more. While part of SCP-343 would have liked to make SCP-001 no longer hostile at all, this was the best he could do without interfering with his own plan. Well, that and call forth some heroic warriors to assist the Black Warrior and the hard-to-destroy reptile. SCP-343 scanned every possible variation of when the day breaks scenario, and when he found the exact sequence of events he was looking for, God opened a portal into that particular semi-canon dimension to bring forth 4 members of the Stardust Crusaders, as seen in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3.
Oh my god!
Bellowed Joseph Joestar, as he was ripped from the reality of one of our own one-off crossover videos into the presently active canon of the When Day Breaks universe. With him were his grandsons Jotaro Kujo, master of the close combat stand known as Star Platinum, and their mutual friend and traveling companion Jean-Pierre Polnareff, wielder of the high-speed Silver Chariot stand. The scrappy Boston Terrier Iggy, also a stand user who possessed a sand-manipulating stand called The Fool, was here as well. He barked with annoyance at jumping between episodes, but was very much grateful to be out of the sun.
Good grief,
Jotaro said as he adjusted his iconic delinquent cap. But despite any gripes from the now manifested manga characters, God had commanded the Stardust Crusaders to protect all the people of Earth, so that was exactly what they would do.
Silver Chariot!
Polnareff unleashed his quick-moving stand on the smaller flesh monsters, using the pinpoint accuracy of his weapon to strike at those who were now too elusive for Abel to deal with. Jotaro sent his Star Platinum into the fray as well, raining down a furious barrage of punches on the amalgamated enemies. Iggy used the Fool to create sand barriers around the smallest wax beings and immobilize them. The most surprisingly effective contributor to the battle was Joseph Joestar, who brought his old skills from the previous part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga out of retirement. For those who are not in the know, Joseph was trained in the art of channeling Haman energy, a magical life force that was originally derived from the positive light of the sun. Haman users like Joseph could even generate Haman within their bodies through specific breathing techniques, and when combined with the whip-like thorny vines of the Elder JoJo's stand Hermit Purple, Haman energy was the perfect antithesis of SCP-001's corruptive rays.
Hammond Deep Purple Overdrive!
Joseph shouted out as his Hammond purified the wax creatures. Every affected former human that Joseph's Hammond touched came apart and was fully melted into inert liquid. Both the Keter duo and the rest of the Stardust Crusaders were impressed by the way that one of Joseph Joestar's often forgotten abilities had come in clutch during this battle. All who were present realized that the condition for winning was now to methodically herd the mounds of wax to Joseph, while protecting him as he neutralized each instance. It was now a game of chess, with Joseph as the king and Abel, 682, Jotaro, Polnareff, and Iggy serving as his knights, rooks, and bishops. The battle dragged on, but the waxen foes were not as clever as the Stardust Crusaders +2, and were vanquished by the joint alliance of worlds. The Sarkic plan to cull the human population of the second moon shuttle had failed. While God comforted the surviving humans, the combatants who fought together on instinct began to size each other up. SCP-682 growled at Iggy, who barked right back at him. Abel and Jotaro exchanged pensive eye contact, each of them seemingly trying to outperform the aloof stoicism of the other. Joseph and Polnareff kept to each other, celebrating the victory with an elaborate handshake that displayed their intergenerational bromance. But things did not remain peaceful for long, as God's decision to allow the characters from the JoJo canon into this one had some unexpected consequences for the universe. Another mighty being from the continuity had been seamlessly added to the current timeline as a means of assuring the Stardust Crusaders could cross over, and Joseph's liberal use of Hammond energy in the prior battle had now woken him up. Enter Kars, the only living member of a race of ancient vampiric immortal humanoids known as the Pillarmen. Thanks to the intertwined power of his people's stone mask and the red stone of Aja, Kars had previously become the ultimate life form. He possessed the uncanny ability to take the shape and properties of any being that had ever lived on Earth. Kars was, along with God, one of the few beings in existence to be completely immune to SCP-001's effects, an unintended consequence of his ascendance into the ultimate life form. When Joseph Joestar was a younger man, he fought and defeated Kars by using a volcanic explosion to propel the ultimate life form into space. Though even the airless vacuum could not kill Kars, the absence of gravity had deprived the Pillarman of most of his movement options and forced him to float mindlessly through the void for many years. But now that humanity was headed for the moon, Kars was able to drift back into the orbit of the shuttle and make his way inside using his infinitely flexible Pillarman physique. He emerged from the shuttle's machinery, facing down his hated JoJo with a signature bravado in his stance. Joseph could only muster one phrase at the sight of his previous arch-nemesis.
Oh my god.
God did not choose to intervene with this battle, so it was down to the assortment of stand users and SCPs present within the shuttle to make sure that Kars was unable to actualize whatever sinister plans he had for the humans aboard the shuttle. In their time, the Pillarmen were thought to be apex predators, who existed to prey on humanity and reign supreme over all life. From a certain perspective, they were the epitome of the strong, as imagined by Sarkic thought, and Kars himself stood at the peak of that pyramid. Would the Sarkic vision of the future in this merged canon be the one where Kars was now the supreme living god? Or would the Pillarmen simply devour a toy with all of humanity for as long as the race remained alive? With these possibilities now in flux, God's lack of interference may have been more than a choice. The very notion of faith was riding on this battle, and to act rashly and bring a halt to this conflict through direct force would make God no different from the avatars of violent rule that now held sway over the human psyche. If all problems were solvable by might makes right, there would be nothing philosophically for God to stand for. Acting in his role as a practical and conniving anime villain, Kars made the first move, sprinting with the legs of a cheetah towards Polnareff and Iggy. Diamond blades extended from the arms of the ultimate life form, and with a pair of light-speed slashes, he critically wounded both of the stand users. From the outside, it seemed as though both the human and dog were barely grazed, but the subtlety of Kars' strike had punctured vital organs and left his victims to internally bleed out.
Polnareff! Iggy!
Joseph exclaimed. Joseph summoned his stand to entangle Kars, but he knew that Hermit Purple could only delay the ascended Pillarman for mere seconds. But that was long enough for both Jotaro and Abel to close into melee range and deliver a maelstrom of blows intended to kill. Between Abel's sword and Star Platinum's fists, the attacks that Kars was enduring would have been enough to destroy most opponents several times over. However, Kars had the title of Ultimate Life Form to live up to, and his counterattack was meant to be a full display of his abilities. Inspired by the gelatinous wax of SCP-001's transformed beings, Kars shifted into a colonial life form covered in poisonous jellyfish stingers. The poison was able to seep through 076's armor and hit Jotaro's exposed skin as well, causing severe pain to both of them. Kars then transformed the tendrils of his body that had latched onto his opponents into a myriad of sizable claws resembling those of a mantis shrimp. Like pulling the trigger of an automatic weapon, he snapped every claw at once with enough force to create miniature thermal explosions that scarred Abel and Jotaro down to their atomic structures. Abel and Jotaro both were incapacitated at the same time, but Jotaro managed to hold on for what seemed like a moment longer. as Star Platinum utilized its most secretive ability to pummel cars hundreds of times within a sliver of frozen time. But even Jotro's desperate gambit was not enough to bring cars down. And now the only two protectors who remained standing were Joseph and SCP-682. Joseph had been injured earlier when Cars cut himself free from the vines of Hermit Purple, but he felt a responsibility to face his old foe once more. SCP-682 did not agree, and the hard-to-destroy reptile crawled between Joseph and Cars.
Get the rest of those disgusting creatures out of here,
SCP-682 said to Joseph.
If this sad clown thinks he's really the ultimate life form, then I can't let him go on living.
Cars sneered at the challenge presented by SCP-682 and began his next attack without warning. His blades were sharp enough to cut through 682's hide like it was butter, but receiving this kind of damage was nothing new to the hard-to-destroy reptile. Joseph used the vines of Hermit Purple to drag the bodies of the other Crusaders and Abel to the safe sections of the shuttle where the rest of the human race waited. Perhaps God could heal the mortal injuries of the fallen, but their time in the fight was over. The blast doors closed and were locked, sealing Cars and SCP-682 in with each other. The fight between two indestructible beings had already begun. Cars soon realized that 682 was quickly regenerating from every strike that the reptile had been dealt. Also, the creature's teeth and claws had begun to glimmer with the same diamond light of Cars' arm blades. SCP-682 retaliated, hitting Cars with a taste of the Pillar Man's own medicine. Such a razor-sharp attack might have brought down Cars before his ascension, but now he could tank and recover it. The pair of monsters continued to fight, with neither apparently gaining the advantage over the other. Meanwhile, Joseph had left his companions in the care of God and was searching high and low for the control room of the shuttle. He knew that the clash of titans between Cars and 682 could not stay contained forever. Given how invincible his old nemesis truly was, there was only a single option. Joseph would have to find a way to jettison Cars back into space, along with the hard-to-destroy reptile. When he reached the nearest control room, abandoned during the panic before Joseph activated Hermit Purple and used its vines to gain control of the system, his stand was an unusual one when it came to technology. But in this case, his ability to bypass security and system mastery was a lucky break for everyone on board.
Goodbye, Cars,
Joseph said aloud as he tripped the necessary programs to send the section of the ship where the gruesome battle raged on, hurtling out into the depths of space. Cars was overcome with rage and humiliation as his decades-long nightmare of becoming space junk was coming true again. But all 682 could think about was what the tardigrades were up to, and how this development might give the Reptile King a chance to return to its kingdom. In any case, all remaining threats to the voyage had been neutralized. The second shuttle arrived on the dark side of the moon, and was naturally integrated into the base according to the protocols that had been planned out so long ago back on Earth. There would be more difficulties ahead in a post-SCP-001 world, but for now, the human race had been saved by the power of God and anime, though nobody involved had no idea of the true horrors still to come. Now go check out SCP-001. Can SCP-049 finally cure when day breaks? And I survived 100 days of SCP-001 when day breaks. Here's what happened.